Okay, let's go ahead and get started today. First of all, thank you for everyone who has dialed in and connected. We're very excited about our webinar today on adapting to adaptive learning. Our presenter, Patricia O'Sullivan from the University of Mississippi, is going to talk about her experience transforming an existing lecture class over to a more personalized experience. Just a couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. One, we are recording today's webinar, which should run about a half hour. At the end of that half hour, we will transition into a Q&A session. So if you can't stay beyond the scheduled 30 minutes, we will be sending out the recording, so you'll be able to experience the Q&A session. If you do have any questions or would like to submit a question for Patty at the end, please do use the chat or Q&A function that you see through WebEx, as your lines are all muted. So we will address your questions even if we don't get to them at the end. We'll make sure that we follow up with you. So on that note, I will turn it over to Patty O'Sullivan to talk to us about her transformation of her lecture class today. So Patty, take it away.
Thank you, Leah. And thank you everyone for taking the time out of a December day to join us. Really excited to share my experience with you. And also just thank you to Realizeit for hosting this webinar, and particularly thank you, Leah, for setting up the webinar and helping me with all the technical aspects of WebEx. So like Leah said, my name is Patty O'Sullivan, and I just recently took a job as the manager of the Personalized Learning and Adaptive Teaching Opportunities Program. We call it PLATO. At the University of Mississippi. But previous to that, and still actually, was an adjunct faculty member in the School of Pharmacy. And so the course that I converted to personalized learning is in the School of Pharmacy. So I'm just I've got some slides just to kind of show you that, walk you through that process. So here's just an outline of what I'm going to talk about today, why I chose adaptive learning, what problems I was having that led me to that solution, what the transformation process looked like, the challenges to me and my students, the benefits. I have some student feedback. I gave a survey last week to my students, so I've got some of that feedback, conclusion, and then just, like Leah said, a Q&A session. So let's go ahead and get started. So what needs led me to adaptive learning? It's always nice to have a picture of the Eiffel Tower, but actually one of my needs was that I had the opportunity to live in France 3 years ago. My husband had a sabbatical opportunity. We moved the whole family over there, and what I had planned to do was just turn my ethics class in the School of Pharmacy into an online class. My department chair wasn't entirely comfortable with this plan. She really preferred the idea of having the students meeting physically. So we compromised on a hybrid where I managed all of the content delivery online, the discussions, the assessments, and then a teaching assistant would meet with the students during their class time, and the class meets 3 times a week for 50 minutes. And that worked out really well. The teaching assistant did mostly discussion with the students, but then they did all the content online, and the students seemed to really like that, that model. When I returned, so just to go to the next slide here, when I returned in 2014, I had one of the highest enrollments that we'd ever had in the ethics class. So you can see that chart on the right, how the enrollments have increased nearly every year. We did have kind of an odd year last year where enrollments dipped, but the class just kept getting bigger and bigger. And it was set up initially as a discussion class. So you know, these numbers were just too big for discussion, and we tried all kinds of different things. We tried to split it into, you know, fall and spring sections, and then we divided it again into 2 and 3 sections. But just scheduling-wise, that became really difficult for the students. It became difficult for the university because we just didn't have the space, the classroom space. So this is kind of where I was trying to figure out this problem when I met the people at Realizeit. So adaptive learning really provided the solution to the question of what do I do with these high enrollments and how do I keep this a discussion class. So what I ended up doing was delivering the course content through the adaptive courseware. And I had thought to do that just because we had done it previously when the course was hybrid and part of it was online. The students seemed to like that format, but the adaptive courseware was much more interactive, a much more interactive experience for them. And then we divided the class into 2 or 3 sections depending on the enrollments. So this past semester, in the pilot, I had 51 students, and we divided them into a group A and a group B. Group A met Mondays, group B met Wednesdays. In the spring, there are 110 students enrolled, so we're going to divide them into 3 sections and meet each of those sections once a week. The class is a hybrid, so you know, some of it's online and some of it's face-to-face, and we've also flipped it, meaning again, the students learn all of the course content through the adaptive courseware, through Realizeit, and then when they meet with me and my teaching assistant, we can really maximize that face-to-face time. We have discussion sessions in those smaller group sessions, and we also have a lot of active learning components as well, really just to practice the material that the students have learned in the adaptive courseware. So the transformation process, I decided to call this glaciers, not only just because that's what the process seemed to spell out, but it seemed like such an obstacle to me when I first started working with Realizeit to take a bunch of articles and videos and PowerPoint slides and lecture notes and turn them into a really rich content, adaptive learning experience. But what I learned working with the really great team at Realizeit, some superb pedagogy experts and instructional designers, is that glaciers are ecosystems. They are not obstacles. And so what I found when we went through this process of organizing my content and chunking it up into smaller learning nodes, is that there's just so much of an ecosystem to a course, to learning, and going through this process really helped me understand my course so much better. So I'm just going to briefly go through the steps in the process with you. So the first thing that we had to do, I worked with some content experts to just gather materials. I first of all wanted to get the materials that were third party, make sure I had all the permissions in place. I had lectures that were just kind of random notes or on bullet points on PowerPoints, and those had to be rewritten into narratives. And then I had to get the appropriate visuals, and not just the right visual, but the visual that was royalty-free or copyright-free, or I had permission to use it. So that part of it was a good bit of work. The next bit that we did was I was asked to align my learning objectives, and this part of the process really taught me the most. So we started with the learning objectives of the entire program of the School of Pharmacy, and then we aligned those to my course. And then we took each lesson in the course and aligned it with the parent learning objectives. And then after that, every assessment was aligned. And this really was a revealing process because there was so much content I found that I had in the course that I thought was interesting or the students might enjoy or they would get something out of, and the experts that I worked with at Realizeit, kept pressing me to really justify, well, why are you using that test, or why are you using that article, or what is it about that video? How does that align with your learning objectives? And what I found was not everything did align. And so I had to go through a process of eliminating some things, adding other things, and really switching some things around to make sure that the learning objectives were the focus of the course, not the content that I had randomly chosen because I thought it was interesting. The assessments were another interesting part of the process. I gave quizzes and we had homework assignments and some active learning components, but for the most part the grade was based on a midterm and a final. It seems to be that's what we do at the university. A lot of courses will have 3 big high-stakes exams, and that's what the student's grade is based on. And again, the pedagogy experts at Realizeit questioned me, like, why do you do that? What is the point? How does giving a high-stakes exam fit your learning objectives? And what I realized was they don't. In an ethics class, there really was no point to making the students memorize a bunch of content. That wasn't the point of the course. So we eliminated those, and we replaced them with skill-based, authentic assessments that we give on a weekly basis. This also led to writing very clear rubrics for each assignment so students would know what to submit. And it provided us an assessment for every single learning module. We have 10 learning modules in the class, and each one has an assessment rather than going weeks without having an assessment and then having the students cram and taking a high-stakes exam. So this process of assessment I find to be so much more logical. The content organization, this is what you would do with an online course as well, but this process of chunking these the content into learning nodes, again, really helped me see where there are gaps in my content. We shot for 15-minute lessons so that students could do these when they had time, and that it wasn't this big burden where they have to sit down and do 2 and 3 hours work. They could do that if they wanted to, but we had these kind of mini lessons within the bigger lesson, and so organizing those took a bit of time. And then you can see here kind of a screenshot of how Realizeit's learning path works. We had to organize these into a learning path as well. So some of the content here from my ethics class, we had to write I had to write introductions to every module and to every node, and the nodes are the little 15-minute mini lessons. Every node had to have examples, and I really liked this. It wasn't something that I had thought about before in my teaching. I think I might have off the cuff given examples or had anecdotes, but nothing was really written down. So I made sure that every learning node had either a case study or some current research that backed up claims that I was making, or some philosophical scenarios. This example here is a TED Talk. I like TED Talks. And this one was a good example for students to see how morality is a matter of brain science as well as emotion. Then there is a review at the end of every learning node. We had 54 learning nodes within 10 modules. So Realizeit gave me the opportunity to create pools of objective questions for each of these nodes. And the questions students might be asked between 5 and 10 questions at the end of a node, but the pool has to be a lot bigger, so they're not necessarily seeing the same questions over and over. But you can see here that there's a lot of variety in the questions that Realizeit allows. And then every learning node and every module has a summary to just wrap up the lesson. And again, these are things that you might do in a lecture. Certainly you see this kind of formatting in a textbook, but having to write this out and ingest it into the adaptive courseware really forced me to make sure that I had the introductions and the summaries and the examples and all the pieces that are necessary to make a cohesive lesson. So that was the process, and it, you know, I kind of whipped through it in a few minutes, and it sounds pretty easy, but this took a while for us to put together, and I had a lot of help from, like I said, the pedagogy experts and the instructional designers at Realizeit. There was an amazing team that helped me. So some of the challenges that I had on the development stage, I worked on this in the last spring and over the summer. First of all, there was just a paradigm shift in my teaching, flipping a classroom, having the students learn the content on their own and then coming in and just discussing it, and then really just getting away from the lecture. I had lectured for so long. I've been teaching at the University of Mississippi for 15 years, so it's hard to get out of that habit. Balancing the module content was hard for me. Like I said, there were 54 nodes and 10 modules, making sure that the content levels were balanced, you know, that they really did take 15 minutes, that one didn't have, you know, oodles of readings and others were just, you know, short videos. So that was a bit of a challenge. Definitely eliminating the high stakes exams was a challenge. Again, the only reason I could justify giving those exams is because that's what we do. We have a period in the semester called midterms. We have a period in the semester called final exams. And that's just how we'd always done it. But again, this process really forced me to rethink that and think about why I do that. And then just learning how to author in the software. I'm still learning, and it's not difficult, but I'm still learning that piece of it. So we ran the pilot this past fall semester, starting in August. We just wrapped up last week, and like I said, I had 51 students in this pilot, so it was relatively small. And some of the challenges were just, first of all, establishing a pattern for student completion of the modules. You know, when they would review, when I would review the data and make changes to what I would do in the face-to-face time. So I had originally envisioned that the students would maybe complete the module by a Wednesday afternoon. I would have the latter part of the week to review the data, you know, to see where students were struggling, to see which students were struggling, and that way I could make adjustments to the face-to-face time and kind of target my teaching on the areas that the students seem to be having trouble with. The students revolted basically after 2 weeks of this, and they said, this, you know, that doesn't give us enough time. We want more flexibility. And it was a really interesting negotiation with them, because this process had also taught me to really be learner-centered and think about the students and think about what they need. And so when they said to me, this isn't working for us, we need you to move the module completion date back to Friday. You know, in my mind, I was thinking, oh, that doesn't give me a lot of time to revise, you know, my face-to-face lesson. On the other hand, if I'm going to be learner-centered, that's what I need to do. So, so that was really, again, another really interesting piece of this. The grading load was tough. My teaching assistant and I talked about how we probably had too many graded assignments or too many written assignments. We're reworking that, trying to do some more interactive things with the software next semester. And then just keeping track of the updates and then changes to make for scaled versions of the course. So like I said, this is a small pilot that we ran this semester. We're scaling it to more than double the amount of students. And so as things happened, as we went through the lessons and as we went through the face-to-face activities, my teaching assistant and I would talk about, well, how are we going to do this with over 100 students? And we would make notes about that. And so just kind of keeping track of all the revisions that we're going to have to make for the next semester was a bit of a challenge too. But the benefits far outweighed the challenges. I feel like I have a deeper understanding of my course, the structure of it, the content, which I feel is now all justified according to the learning objectives, and then the resources that I'm using and the resources that are available. You know, this process has really helped me see what more is out there that I can draw upon for this course. Definitely there's a better alignment of my content with my learning objectives in this course. That's a huge benefit. Because the process required me having introductions and learning components and examples and summaries and review questions, I feel like the lessons are much more cohesive in terms of putting them together in these mini lessons. This process also changed my perspective on teaching. You know, it's not really about the technology. I mean, the technology that, you know, Realizeit has a fantastic adaptive courseware system that can do a lot of things, gather a lot of data, present content in really interesting ways. But it really was the team that kind of walked me through the process of building a pedagogically sound course. That part of this process was really what impacted me the most, not necessarily the technology itself. So some of the benefits to my students, they definitely feel like they have agency now. There's a lot of active learning both in the software and in the face-to-face time, and they like that. But there's also a lot of reflective learning. You know, the students are asked a lot, both for their lessons, but also because it was a pilot, they're asked a lot about how is this working for you, or how, you know, do you think that this method of learning the content is helping you become a better learner, or how do you feel about not having exams, or how do you feel about having a hybrid class, or even the negotiation with, you know, due dates. It really is giving these students agency, and they're really thinking about learning. They're really thinking about how they learn and how they study, and so I think that's a great benefit to them. The adaptive elements of the courseware are also something that my students very much enjoy. They like to be able to skip content they already know. With adaptive courseware, it can be set up so that the students have a quiz before a lesson. And if there's content that they can show that they've mastered, they don't necessarily have to go through all the steps of all the pieces of that lesson. And then the adaptive elements allow them to review or revise sections that they have trouble with, and they see after they complete a lesson where their weak spots are, where they did really well, and they have the option to revise. They really have enjoyed the clear objectives and rubrics for each assignment. They like that the content is organized the way that it is. That got very high scores on the student feedback. One of the biggest things that they told me in their feedback was that they just don't feel stressed out in this class. They feel like the flexible learning times, meaning that they can learn the content on their schedule, and then the flexible submission times, meaning everything has to be due by a certain time on Friday, but you know, if they want to submit it on a Wednesday, they can. So they like that flexibility. Again, it gives them more agency. They also really like the flipped classroom, and you might say, well, of course, students, you know, enjoy not having to go to class 3 days a week. But it's more than that. I've noticed that absences are way down in my class, and I asked the students about that, and they said that they feel that the flipped classroom means that they enjoy coming to class, that it's not just a lecture where they're taking notes, but they also say that they feel like the class time is more valuable, that they're getting something out of it. So I thought that was really an interesting bit of feedback. So just some things that my students have said about the experience. This first one here on the top left really shocked me. The student who told me that his classes are run like academic hazing rituals. This is a student who reported to me that he often would go into a class on the first day, large classes, maybe 200 students, and the professor would announce straight away that half of the students would probably fail. You know, and he found this very frustrating because of, you know, the money that they pay, but also the work that they do. And, you know, and again, it got me thinking, why do we have that expectation that students will fail? Maybe that's not necessarily the most just approach to have when it comes to higher education. The next comment below that, students are talking about how they like that they can learn, but they're not stressed out. That's another thing I think that we have another expectation of higher ed, that students aren't learning if they're not stressed out, if they're not pulling all-nighters. It doesn't have to be that way. The next comment about students not skipping class because it's enjoyable, but they also find the class is valuable when we're doing active things and it's not just a lecture. And then that last comment, that also struck me. You know, the student who said, no one has ever asked me if the way class is run is working for me. And, you know, again, the students feel a lot of agency with this transformation that you know, it's learner-centered, and I'm asking them, what works for you? I'm willing to make some changes that are reasonable to make this a better experience for you. So just some feedback that they gave from the survey. So the majority of students found that the user interface for Realizeit was very easy to use. In fact, Realizeit had made a video, an introduction video for my students to get them acquainted with the software, and the students actually begged me not to make them watch it in class. They said, just throw it up on the LMS and we'll watch it if we need it. And I put a tracker on it, and I noticed that of 51 students, only 2 of them opened the video. So that just shows you that the technology is pretty easy for these kids. Nearly 70% of students did not have any technical issues with Realizeit over the course of the semester. They rated some of the functions of the adaptive courseware. The majority of my students said that they liked the learning path. They liked seeing what lessons that they had accomplished, which ones that they still had yet to do. They really liked seeing the colors change on the learning path when they had accomplished, when they had completed it, or especially when they had completed it with a high rate of success with the review questions. They rated the action bar least useful. I mean, not useless, but just the least useful to them. And then I asked them if they liked the idea of adaptive and flipped classes, and if they would want to see more of that. And you know, overwhelmingly, nearly 84% of the class said that they would like to see more of their classes use adaptive courseware. So in conclusion, I think how traditional colleges and universities teach large undergraduate classes, it's not meeting the learning needs of 20 to 25% of our students. And I say that because as the program manager of the adaptive learning program at the University of Mississippi, we've targeted certain general education classes that probably could stand to have this experiment go on, just to see if we can increase the outcomes, but some of our gen ed classes have fail, drop, and withdraw rates as high as 25%. And that's not, if we're not serving a quarter of our students, then that's not good. That we shouldn't say, well, that's just the way it is and that's acceptable. I think this experience has taught me that that's not acceptable, to have a quarter of the students fail a course and not necessarily move on in their program and drop out of school and still have the debt. We have increasingly diverse student populations, and they require diverse teaching strategies. I'm not someone who knocks the lecture. I think lectures are great. They have a time and a place. But if that's the only way we're teaching, then I think we need to rethink that. That maybe worked for a certain population. It maybe worked at a certain time period in the history of higher education. It's clearly not working now. Higher education is becoming more expensive and more necessary for students. In order to get the high-paying jobs that they want or that they'll need to support a family and themselves, they need a college degree, and college degrees are getting more expensive. So we owe it to them to find ways to make college completion happen for them. Again, it doesn't seem acceptable to me that high percentages of students start college and don't finish. And then I think my final comment on that conclusion really brings all the rest together. We really can't teach anymore with the aim of weeding out students or with the attitude that 20 to 25% failure rates are acceptable. Higher ed has changed over the years, and maybe there was a time when weeding out of students made sense. It does not make sense anymore. And again, when you consider the cost of higher education, not just what students are taking out on loans or what their families are paying for tuition, but the cost to them if they don't get a degree, the lifelong costs in terms of the potential income and the potential social mobility, to weed them out like that does not seem like a socially just way to conduct higher education. And so for me, adaptive learning is a social justice issue. I see it as a way to take these large lecture classrooms where teachers don't even necessarily know who their students are and break them down into smaller, more personalized learning experiences for students. And we've got data that shows that that adaptive learning works in terms of increasing student outcomes and increasing retention. So I feel like if this is working, this is something that we should continue to use, to expand its use, and again, making higher education learner-centered. And with that, I am going to conclude. Leah, I don't know if people have been typing in questions in the chat function.
Thank you so much, Patty. This was fantastic information. We do have some questions here, and the first one we'll start with, it's from Michael Evans, and he said, Patty, as you know, he's looking to use Realizeit as a platform for an interactive and adaptive learning system for large sections of an introduction to American government. I think we still need to rely heavily on high-stakes exams for that course. Do you think we'd lose a lot of Realizeit's advantages by assessing students that way?
That's a great question, because you're absolutely right. I mean, my course doesn't need a high-stakes exam, but lots of courses do. In fact, we're running pilots in the spring with our math department, and high-stakes exams, and not only is that how they operate, but it makes a lot of sense in a course like that and in a course like yours. Yeah, I think it works, and I don't think you lose anything. I think actually it's a big advantage because in the Realizeit format, students can practice and revisit the learning, and you can have practice quizzes in there. You can even have the exam in there. You might choose to have the exam in person and on paper. But however you decide to do it, I think that, you know, I hope I didn't convey the message that adaptive courseware is a good way to replace the high-stakes exam. I think that the technology is a complement to really any course format that you want, but the advantage I see with it is the ability of students to be able to do practice questions, especially for the objective questions, and breaking down that knowledge for them and nodes and having them revisit it. That's such a, you know, it's a evidence-based way to learn and retain information for high-stakes exams.
Okay, great. Our next question is, from your perspective, how much as a percent of the course is the use of adaptive courseware?
I guess I'm not clear on what's meant by the course. So the content is entirely delivered in the courseware. That's where the students read lessons, watch videos, they have interactive lessons. So the content piece is 100% in there. If I see that students are struggling with a particular concept, then I can go in the face-to-face portion of it, and we can cover that. But mainly in my class, we've been able to use the face-to-face time to get deeper at topics. So instead of covering basic information, we're using that basic information as a platform to talk about deeper things, or we're doing activities to practice what they learned. So in my class, we meet once a week, and then they're, you know, they're in the courseware the rest of the time. So if you wanted to look at it just in terms of time, if that's how you're defining the course, I would say that 2/3 of their time is in the courseware, and then that other piece, 1/3, there in the face-to-face section. I hope I've answered your question.
I think so. There's a follow-up question that said, you know, if you ask the student the same thing in their experience, what would they say would be their time allotment in the course, adaptive versus not?
Oh, I see. Yeah, we have this rule at Ole Miss in which we say to the students, you should expect to put in 10 hours a week for every course. So that's about 3 hours a week in class time, and the rest of it you're supposed to be spending, you know, studying or doing homework, whatever. And no student I've ever talked to spends 10 hours a week in class. So yeah, time-wise, I've noticed on average my students are in the courseware. Each module they're spending between 2 hours and 3.5 hours is kind of the most. 3.5 is you know, on the high end, but they're spending around 2 hours, 2.5 hours in the courseware per week.
Okay, good. If that didn't answer the question, please feel free to send a follow-up through chat, but it looks like we did, so we're good there. Moving on, and you touched on this a bit at the beginning of the webinar, but with all of the options out there, what drove you to choose personalized adaptive over just plain online, and then as a add-on to that, more specifically, Realizeit?
Oh, no, that's an excellent question, because I did do an online version of this when I was in France, and I worked as an instructional designer in our online division at the university for a year. I like online. I wouldn't knock it, but one thing I find about it is it tends not to be very interactive. It tends to be, you know, a lot of the courses that I saw online were basically courses where students were asked to read something and go to a discussion board and write about it, or to submit something to the instructor. And it just seemed a very flat experience. There just wasn't a lot for the student to physically do with the material. So I knew I didn't want that kind of experience for my students. So that's why I liked the adaptive, because the adaptive learning, there's just a lot, I know this sounds silly, but there's just a lot to click and to click through. And it may seem like a small thing, but we actually do have studies on this, that students are much more engaged when they feel they have agency. And the adaptive courseware allows them a lot of times to choose, when do I go on next to this, or which lesson do I want to go on to, or do I want to stick with this lesson and work on it a little more before going on to that one. So just that agency that they have in adaptive courseware is much superior to online. I also just think adaptive courseware forces instructors to chunk better. Again, with online, I've seen professors do voiceovers of PowerPoint presentations, and they end up being about an hour and a half long. And I've even said to these instructors, I don't know that anyone is going to want to sit through that. I don't think they will sit through it. And so with adaptive courseware, you just can't put in an hour and a half video like that. You'd have to chunk it up into smaller little bits. So I think that's also an advantage. And then the third advantage, I would say, is the review questions. After every mini lesson, every learning node, there are review questions to make sure that the students are on track and that they're understanding the material. And so I think that's really, really valuable, because it's giving students some immediate feedback on you know, how they're taking in this information, but it's also those review questions are reinforcing the material. Again, this is a lot of the adaptive learning is based on brain science, and brain science says that if content is chunked and people are reviewing after short bits of time and short bits of information, they're much more likely to retain that information. And I think adaptive courseware takes that brain science and uses it to help students be successful, whereas online, it's just a delivery system. It's not based on any kind of evidence-based learning methods. So sorry, that's my, that was, oh, and Realize It, right? Why specifically Realize It?
Yes.
You know, my answer to that is they were the first company that I met, and I'm very glad that they are. I was at a conference, and I had a friend who was working with Realize It, and she introduced me to the team, and they just seemed really responsive. You know, I'm an adjunct instructor. I'm also staff now, and any of you who work at a university know that there tends to be a bit of a caste system at the university. You know, people who are tenure track, people who have tenure, people who have PhDs versus not. And you know, and sometimes you can feel that keenly, you know, that if you are not tenured and you don't have a PhD, you're somehow designated as not as institutionally important. And one thing that I really liked about Realize It is that they treated everybody as important. You know, they weren't necessarily only wanting to talk to university administrators or tenured faculty. You know, to them, a teacher is a teacher. Everybody's important, and I just loved that feeling I got from them. Now, as a program manager for the adaptive courseware program at the University of Mississippi, I've been able to meet a lot of other vendors of adaptive courseware, and they're all very nice people too. And I've had a chance to use their platforms as well. What I like primarily about Realizeit is that I can say to them, hey, you know, I had this idea of how we could do something. I'll give you a specific example. I have these case studies in my course, and I want to make them more interactive. I want to, I won't get into the details of it, but instead of just reading the case study and analyzing it and commenting on it, I want the students to be able to physically do things with it and have variables in it. And I can go to Realize and say, is this something you can do? And they're very honest with me, and they might say, well, we don't do that now, or we can do this piece of it, but you know what, we're going to send that to our tech team and see if we can build that out for you. And that's not an answer I've gotten from every vendor. You know, if I've said things like that to other vendors, their response, might be, yeah, sure, we can do that, and they can't do that, or they say, no, we don't do that, because their product is built and they're not going to tinker with it anymore, and Realizeit is constantly trying to make their product better. You know, we say we're learner-centered and we want to adapt to our students. Well, Realizeit is really teacher-centered, and they're trying to adapt to what our needs are for our courses, and that's what I really like about the company.
Great. And then for our last question, what is the most important advice for someone who is about to do the same thing you did to consider before beginning and then during the process?
I guess in the developmental stage, I would not underestimate the amount of time and organization it takes. Now, I built this course from scratch. I didn't start with a textbook. It was all my content or third-party content that I got permissions for. That's a much longer process. So if you're going to do that, yes, time is a huge consideration. I also, in the development stage, would advise relying on the company's pedagogy team for help. And if you are, interviewing vendors, that's definitely something I would ask and say, what do you have in terms of instructional design support and pedagogy support? Realizeit had this whole team working with me. I mean, there must have been like 4 or 5 people at one point who I would talk to once every 2 weeks. And we still do. We still have a check-in call once every 2 weeks. So I wouldn't underestimate the time in the development stage, but I would definitely rely on the team. And if they don't have a team, then they're not the right company for you. In the pilot stage, I would just the advice I would give is to keep talking to your students. It doesn't have to be a formal survey. I met with my students in the middle of the semester instead of giving a midterm. I met with every single one of those 51 students for an individual appointment. And I had a set of questions I asked them about, how is this going for you? How can we make this better? A lot of it was anecdotal. I wrote these things down. It was informal. And then I gave a formal survey at the end. But yeah, my advice would just be keep talking to the students. They will tell you what's working and what's not working. And be prepared to make changes based on their feedback.
That's great, Patty. And again, that was all the questions that we had. So at this point, I will thank you very much for a great hour of presentation and discussion. We really appreciate you sharing your experiences with us. We will follow up with the recording to everyone. And I did put in the chat, if you have additional questions, feel free to visit our website or contact me directly. I can put you in touch with the proper team member, and it looks like Patty's got her email up too. So if you think of anything that you would like to know more about, please keep in touch with us. And again, thank you everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you everyone. Thank you, Leah.
Thanks, Patty.